What's up, guys? Welcome back on Sport Vitamins for episode 46. Today's guest is Antonio Squillante. Antonio is a strength and conditioning coach with over 10 years of experience coaching high school and collegiate athletes, competing at the national and international level. Currently, he is a Ph.D. student at the University of Southern California. Antonio is also the author of several books on strength training. This is definitely a must-listen episode for all the strength coaches out there. So, without further ado, guys, here is episode 46 of Sport Vitamins with Antonio Squillante. Antonio, welcome on Sport Vitamins. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm fine. What about you?
I'm doing great. It's a huge honor to have you on today. Thanks for taking the time and squeezing this episode into your busy schedule.
I apologize for my voice. I'm coming off of a cold, so it might be a little bit like low voice, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no problem. I can change you while editing the episode. No problem.
Thank you.
So first off, usually I start asking my guests about their background.
Yeah. Sure. Let me start by going over my athletic background, and then we can go over more academics if you want to, because every time people ask me about like my background, I always make it clear, like I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't been an athlete first. So everything comes from practicing sport and falling in love with sports, you know. I did some track and field in high school, mostly throwing events. And that kind of got me interested into strength training / fitness, because you know that growing up in Italy, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, the world of strength and conditioning wasn't quite as developed as it is today. We're coming off that big rise of like bodybuilding and fitness type of industry. So my early approach to weight training was mostly bodybuilding based. I was always fairly decent in the weight room, so that got me more into like strength training. And I still wanted to play some sport eventually. So a few friends of mine brought me over and play some American football, which back then was a niche in Italy, was not very much popular as a sport. And that's where I kind of like took off in my commitment with the weight room as well. Like, you know, if you want to play football, you need to get bigger. Last season I played, I was 125 kilograms with a 350 kilos deadlift. So
Wow.
I was a big boy lifting big weights. So that got me into strength training for sure. And I'll be honest with you, most of what I've done in terms of strength training was quite miserable looking back in hindsight. But luckily I survived. I just, you know, going back to the same concept, like we didn't really have that much guidance back then. Like the few programs that we could look at were like either based on Flex magazine or some like early YouTube videos on like how to train football players. There was nothing very scientific, if you will, about it. And that kind of pushed me to learn more about sports science. So my mom really wanted me to become an engineer. I was horrible in math, so no way I could be an engineer. So I started studying biology at the University of Padova. I did about a semester there. And then I realized that although I was very interested in biology and like the more like physiological aspects, if you will, about like cell metabolism and all that good stuff, I needed something to be a little bit more applied to like the art of coaching, if you will. So I switched over to, I usually translate it in terms of like physical education or sports science. We call it scienze motorie. It's a little bit of both. If you look at the old educational system in Italy, I did my undergrad in Italy, and then I always wanted to. I was doing some coaching, like strength and conditioning coaching with rugby, but I really wanted to have an experience in American football. So that's how I started applying abroad. I eventually moved to the States, got my first job in a small Division III college, and from that point onward has been mostly developing a career in coaching. I never lost sight of education, so I continued my education throughout my career. I took a few master degree, a master degree in orthopedic and rehab, a master of science in strength and conditioning, and one in biomechanics, sports biomechanics. And I also did a postdoc in the United Kingdom in sports nutrition. And that's something that I did to complement my work as a strength and conditioning coach. I just wanted to know more about injury prevention. I wanted to know more about program design, and I needed. Growing up, I was a huge fan of Dr. Massimo Spattini. He was actually my nutritionist when I played football in Italy. So I grew up like idolizing him and his knowledge of all things like sports nutrition. So I was very much into the biochemistry and chemistry involved in nutrition. So I saw that part of my educational journey more of a complementary type of activity to my main job, which was coaching. So I just wanted to be a better practitioner. Up until to the point in 2016, when I was lucky enough to coach at the Olympics for track and field. I was strength and conditioning coach for a number of different throwers and sprinters that competed under Team USA. And that kind of like made me realize that I felt like I was toward the end of my journey into coaching, and I needed to bring it to the next level. And that next level to me was going on the other side of coaching, so the educational side of coaching. And that's where I decided to pursue a career in academics. So that was about 5-6 years ago. Started my Ph.D. It's coming to an end shortly. I should be done in about a few months. Since then, I've been mostly involved in teaching. I'm an instructor for the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I teach for 70 College in Europe. I teach here in Southern California. So 99% of my job now is either teaching or writing or doing research. Lately, as of 6 months ago, I was offered to take on a new job, a new role as a strength and conditioning coach for Team USA Cycling, for the sprinting program, so track cycling. And I jumped on it wholeheartedly just because I didn't know much about cycling, if not anything at all. But after I saw their training for a little bit, and I was exposed to some of the strength and conditioning that they're doing over Europe, especially in the Netherlands, I realized that these athletes train like weightlifters. So it's pure power. There's not a single aspect of endurance when it comes to sprint cycling on track. And since then, I've been riding myself. I love the sport. We're about to leave in February for the Nation Cup, so the first international events leading up to the qualifying round for the Olympics in 2024. And I'm also running for them a talent ID program, trying to scout like younger, talented athletes to join the team. So it's a little bit of research, a little bit of coaching, but that's in 5 minutes, that's my journey since 2001 till 2023.
So, first of all, good luck on the upcoming event. And Antonio, you have had an amazing career so far. And but I want to go back to when you said that everything started from you being an athlete yourself. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that story because I actually finished playing baseball 3 years ago, which is also a niche sport, like you said, for football. And that's really what got me into strength and conditioning, because when I was playing baseball in Italy, even though I was playing in first division, I didn't have a strength coach. So I had to start training by myself. I had to start doing some also random stuff and learn through trials and errors, for sure. Yeah. So in your opinion, how important is for a strength coach to be an athlete himself?
It's necessary. I don't mean that you need to be a professional athlete or anything like that. It's not like if you want to coach American football, you have to play in the NFL, nothing like that. But you need to have, and sometimes it's not even necessary for you to have, as a coach, for you to have experience in the sport you coach, because that's where the knowledge comes into play. And that's where like evidence-based practice comes into play. Because if you know how to look at resources and research, you can find the information you need to design a sounded scientific program for any sport. So that's the education component of it. But you will never be able to relate to the athlete and the training process as much if you haven't done it yourself. If you haven't been an athlete yourself, you need to know the level of commitment that is needed to be an athlete. You need to know the pain and discomfort that comes with training to be an athlete. To be an athlete, I mean to compete in sport at whatever level, like when you dedicate yourself to something that is bigger than you, which is like competing against other people, they might most likely going to be better than you. that gives you a perspective on the training process that someone who had only learned it in school will never have. You need to have that connection with the process of being an athlete to understand and relate. And I mean it because I see a lot of so part of my job is teaching the physical therapy program at USC. So we do some courses, and one of the courses I teach is program design. So we teach physical therapists how to do program design for strength training as a late stage of rehabilitation, early stage of return to play. And these are great students. They're extremely knowledgeable. They're probably more knowledgeable than I am in terms of anatomy, biomechanics, all that good stuff. But the majority of them never once even step foot in a weight room. And then you see the disconnect when they come and then give you an example of a training program where you have 12, 15, 16 exercises in a training session, loads and reps completely off the chart, which might make sense if you look at a standard table on the NSCA textbook. But then you know that in real life, that will never happen if you're pushing those sets the way you should push those sets to get better. So you see that there's a disconnect. Like in theory, they're very well prepared, but in practice, what they put together on paper, it makes no sense whatsoever. And you can't use it. And I think that that disconnect comes from not having gone through a legit training program with the goal of improving performance. And that also speaks about the need to be, as a practitioner, always very humble and question your approach to training. Like, it doesn't matter how educated you are, and it doesn't matter how much experience you have. Every time you're designing a program, whether it's like strength program, speed, agility, you name it, you're gambling. Like, nothing in the adaptation process is never out of a textbook. You need to be open-minded and know that at least 50% of times you're going to be wrong. And you need to have a system in place where you can assess your mistakes, measure them, learn from them, and improve. And if you don't have that mentality that is always like performance driven, and you're constantly chasing that improvement in performance, you're never going to fully learn the extent of the adaptation process as it happens in elite level athletes. Like, one thing is saying, oh yeah, train for 6 months and then play the games. If you win the games, you're a better athlete. That doesn't go anywhere. You want to train for 6 months, maybe win or lose the games, it doesn't matter, but you need to measure if that athlete is becoming a better athlete. Are you making them more explosive? Are they faster? Regardless of the score in the game. They might be winning, they might be losing, it doesn't matter. But you want to see if your program design is creating positive adaptation. And that's a mentality that you carry with you if you come from an athletic background, because you've lived it on yourself. You've chased that gain constantly. So you value even that extra inch in jump height or that extra second that you spare on a 505 agility. That means the word to you, and therefore it means the word for your athlete. So you have a different mindset and a different attitude toward this job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that if you have a background as an athlete, you're also more ready to change the things on the fly. Let's say, for example, you have something planned for that specific day, and your athlete, especially if you work with teams where you're at the same time, you're coaching 10, 15, 20 players at the same time. And you have one of these athletes coming up one day saying, okay, today I'm sore, I don't feel like lifting, or today I don't feel like doing this. And you need to be ready and know exactly what you can do and what you can't do with the specific athlete on that day.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think you also become more skilled in detecting lies that often athletes bring to the table. Like, you can tell if an athlete is truly fatigued or not, because you know what that feels like. You know what type of signs to look for. So it gives you more, like you said, more of an open-minded approach where like you can be much more rational and critical about the way you go about training, but also more selective in knowing what type of adjustments to make, depending on the athletes you have in front of you in that specific moment.
Yeah, and you, as you said, you can also recognize when an athlete is lying, but then, and this is a topic for a different discussion probably, but you also know that it's a game of give and take sometimes. So, okay, I understand that you're lying today, but I will follow you today, but tomorrow you're gonna give it back to me for sure.
There's a lot of psychology, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely,
It's a constant balancing. Yeah.
So I want to go back to something that you said before, and you said that we work on a daily basis with a very competitive people. And I want to know what's your opinion on competitiveness, first of all, and how can a strength coach show and display his competitiveness?
Well, that's an awesome question. So I hope I'm not going to disappoint anyone by saying that. So we're in 2023. I've been coaching for the last 15 to 16 years. Like, I don't think ever a single day in my entire career as a coach I ever cared about winning a game. But that doesn't mean that I'm not competitive. I'm extremely competitive, but I don't care about winning games or winning championships. I care about making my athletes better athletes. Um, Having been an athlete myself, I know that there's a lot that goes into building a winning team, and that has much more to do. That goes for like individual sports and team sports as well. That goes into the whole team environment, the coaching staff, resources, financial resources. Like, there's so much that goes into building a winning team. We, as strength and conditioning coaches, have the littlest role to play in this much bigger picture of like developing a winning team. A very important one, but still a small one. So we don't have that much control over the outcome of our team, like whether or not our team is winning or our athletes are winning. But we do have a massive degree of control whether or not our athletes are becoming better athletes. So in that sense, I'm extremely driven. Like, if I could, I would test my athletes on a weekly basis. I want to see them getting better. And if they're not getting better, I get mad at myself. I don't get mad at them. So I take full responsibilities of the way I go about program design, and I don't take anything that is not perfect. Like, I need to give them what they need to be in a position to perform at their best. That at that point, my job is done. If I manage fatigue well, I improve them, I put them in a better position to win a game, then I'm done. Then if they win the game or not, of course, if they win, I'm the first one to be super happy. But like, I went through my first season in American football back in 2011 without winning a single game. I was coaching a very small team with very limited resources. We had a weight room for 98 kids with 3 squat racks and 3 bars. The field was available only 2 hours a day compared to other teams that could practice 3 times a day if they wanted to. We didn't have money to provide our student athletes, so there was not much recruiting. So of course the team was struggling, and you have to be objective about like your limitations, you know. But nevertheless, like, in 3 months worth of a season, first of all, I didn't have any single injury happening during the entire season. And every single athlete ended the season with the same level of strength, power, and endurance that they started the season with. So I know that my part as a strength and conditioning coach was done at the best of my abilities. Of course, I was frustrated. We didn't win a single game, but you know, victories will come. Like, the more you stick around this job, the more you get some sort of rewards in terms of like winning games or working for a winning team. But I don't think that should be the motivation. And that also was my approach as an athlete first. Like, I remember even nowadays, when every now and again I still compete in maybe powerlifting or some sort of like, or even just ran an half marathon or whatever I decide to take on, I know that I'm not the best athlete in the field. And I know that there are people that are much more dedicated than I am. They're younger, they have more time to invest in training. So I can't expect to be as competitive as they are. But as long as I improve my PR, that's all that matters for me, because I know that I got better somehow. So I think it's more about your intrinsic motivation in getting better more than the extrinsic reward of winning a gold medal or finishing first or second, you know? I think it's, if you have that mentality as an athlete and as a coach, you very much enjoy the journey more than the goal. And that helps you to appreciate more of the job you do, the people you come across, the situations you're lucky to live. Like, I tell these guys and girls, like, you're professional athletes. You're paid to train. You're living a dream. Just enjoy it. Don't complain. There's nothing to complain about. So just ride along, enjoy, try to make the best out of it, because it will end sooner or later, whether you want it or not. It will end. Hopefully will end on a high, but it might also end on a low. A bunch of people lose their career because of an injury. So don't always expect that the job is going to be there for you. Enjoy it as much as you can. And I think only good things can happen if you have that type of mentality.
For sure. This is something that I always tell my athletes and also my colleagues that, of course, it's a little bit provocative, but I always tell them, listen, there is other people in this world that work for real.
Yeah.
So enjoy.
Yeah. We can wear sweatpants and be in a weight room, and
Exactly.
these athletes have access to good food. Their room and board is paid. Like, they're privileged, extremely privileged. Being fatigued and complaining about how hard it is to be an athlete is nothing compared having a 9 to 5 job in a factory where you're paid minimum wage and you can barely afford food at the end of the month. Like, some of these, believe me, I had this conversation heart to heart with a lot of athletes, and I don't have any problem voicing my disapproval towards certain attitudes. I think that as a coach, the very first thing that you should expect from your athletes is respect for the sport and respect for the gift that they had. If they don't show that positive attitude and they don't have like a positive demeanor when they come to practice, when they're with their teammates, it's worthless to invest any time in them. They should reconsider their approach to sport, whether or not they're good at what they do. I couldn't care less.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to your first season with the football team, you said you had 0 wins, but the strength level and power output were still high at the end of the season, and you had 0 injuries. So these are 3 very important KPIs when it comes to evaluating the work of a strength coach. Is there anything else that you like to evaluate in order to see if a strength coach is doing a good job or not?
That's a great question. I think, well, it really much depends on the sport. The one thing that is common across the board is power output. Like, sometimes, depending on the sport you're coaching, your strength levels might decrease a little bit during the season. It's almost inevitable because of fatigue and all that good stuff that comes with playing often and playing long games. But your power should always stay as it was before the season started, because that's your currency when you play on the field. That's what you need to be able to have to be competitive. And you want to be as competitive, if not more competitive, at the end of the season compared to the beginning of the season. Because let's say American football or even soccer or whatever other sport, you may actually have your most important games at the end of a season as opposed to the beginning. So assuming a loss in muscle function through the season is not tolerable for any athlete, whether it is peak power if you're looking at explosive type sports, or average power if you're looking at like endurance type sports. One more thing that I also look at almost for every athlete is body composition. I want them to preserve lean body mass throughout the season and potentially don't gain any additional body fat. I've never been a big proponent of, because we're in season, it's okay to overeat. I think you always have to, I personally include a caloric intake as one of my variables in any program I design. So I always keep in mind, well, total caloric intake and energy availability, because that has a lot to do with how well an athlete can recover from training. So that, to me personally, is one of the most important variable I consider, even before I look at average training intensity or volume. So that to me is very important. Lean body mass needs to be preserved, and you always want to keep your athletes somewhere fit, meaning like within at least normative value when it comes to body fat. And doesn't mean to be like ripped all year round, but like in decent shape throughout the year. And then the third one, it's probably just general aerobic fitness. And for that, I mean straightforward like VO2 max. Again, is a little bit like power. Like, to play any sport, you need to be powerful, and you have to be somewhere fit to play for the length of time you're required to play. So you can't lose your aerobic capacity, because that will at some point compromise your ability to practice and compete. So that needs to stay up. So if I were to look at the 3 values that I look across the board for all athletes, it's power, VO2, and body composition. looking predominantly at lean body mass. Then other athletes, like, I don't know, like track cycling, for instance, right now, like it's 99.999% a matter of peak power output. That's all they care about. So for them, strength levels are extremely important. So I need them to, if they have a 2.5 times body weight back squat as a 1 rep max before the season, it needs to stay the same throughout the season. It can't go down. You can't tolerate losing even just 10 kilos because that will affect your power up. Other sports are not that strict. So that might depend on what type of sport you're coaching. But yeah, across the board, power, aerobic fitness, and body composition for sure.
Okay, interesting. Antonio, you said you moved from playing and then coaching team sports now to working now with individual sports. How did your philosophy and system evolve over the years and going from a team sport again to an individual sport?
That's a great question. I think coaching team sports is almost a necessary type of experience for all coaches because it's much more challenging. Whether you like it or not, whether you're passionate or not about any team sport, I think it's a great experience for all coaches to go through. Because when you work with the individual athlete, you can individualize the training program to the extent that you need to. So you know every single metric, you have control on every single set of every single rep. You can calibrate the load, you can calibrate the speed, you can calibrate the volume, and you have immediate feedback. Whereas when you work with team sports, you need to be able to develop a certain degree of flexibility in your approach to be able to look at trends among a norm, like a group of subjects where, like, okay, some athletes might be getting better, some athletes might be getting worse or staying the same. What's the overall trend? What can I do to design a training intervention that is going to fit for everyone? It might be short on one end or a little bit too much on the other, but it's good enough that anyone can benefit from. So creating a norm across different individuals. And that, I think that's an actual exercise for a strength and conditioning coach. Like, it's something that you need to go through to learn how to, quote to quote, bend the rules a little bit, where, like, you know that a certain moment of the year you might be doing, for instance, whatever, 3 sets of 3 at 80% of water max. That's what the book says. But maybe some of your athletes are not quite there yet, and they might be okay with a little bit less load. Some other athletes might be tolerating more load. So maybe you push it to like a 75 and you make adjustments on someone, you give them more reps, someone you give them more speed. You start balancing things through the program in a way that you don't learn from a textbook. That's the art of coaching. It's an individual basis within a team that makes it extremely challenging for you to adjust a training intervention. I think, again, I really think it's a training exercise that every practitioner should do.
You know, I had this conversation with another strength coach yesterday in another podcast, and we were exactly discussing about this, about the fact that when you work with team sports, you need to be more adaptable, especially when you work with professional athletes. And most of the time you have these athletes only for 10 months and that's it. And then they move to another team. And for example, we were saying that the best scenario will be for us to have an athlete from when they are 15 all the way to the end of their career. And that's where we could really develop the athlete. But most of the time we have an athlete that come to our team when they are somewhere between 25 and 30 years old, and probably they don't have all the background that they need to express, I don't know, 80% of the 1RM, 90% of the 1RM in the weight room. So I would like to know, if that happens to you, what would you do?
So that's a good question. I think as a practitioner in general, a strength and conditioning coach, whether you work with individual teams, individual athletes or team sport, whether or not you have the time to develop an athlete from the youth level to the professional level, which, again, I agree with you, very rarely happens. Like, the majority of us have to a lot of us have to fix issues before we can develop athletes. So it's a very uncomfortable place to be. Like, athletes that should be close to their peak, like you said, are like 25, 30 years old sometimes. In terms of like weight room experience, they're completely beginners. So it's a very tricky position to be in. But regardless of it, I think, and I hope I don't disappoint with the answer, but I think you need to be able to build in your programs, whatever that is, a degree of flexibility that allows you for deviations from the norm. And for deviations from the norm, I mean like, okay, and I can give you a very straightforward example. Like I've done a lot of work in weightlifting, Olympic lifting. And for Olympic weightlifters, there has been for decades now, this mentality where if you're a beginner athlete, you have to do, I don't know, 200 repetitions a week. You become an intermediate athlete, you have to do 300 repetitions a week. And then you become an advanced athlete and you need to do 400 repetitions a week or more. And it's all based on not even your age, your chronological age, is your results in competition. And you may have some freak of natures that are completely beginner, they're just extremely well built and strong. And at their first meet, they get a total that places them at a national level, but they haven't even trained for more than a year. So they're technically beginner, but you can approach them with the volume that you would do for an advanced athlete. So you can apply the system that is supposed to be applied. So you need to be able to have that. And that goes to beginner and experienced athletes or individual or team sports, whatever the case may be. You need to know that in our job, there are more exceptions to the rule than rules. Like we need to know what the rules are so that we can break them in a safe manner. Like we can't go crazy and give programs that make no sense whatsoever, but we need to know that yes, there is a rule. To get stronger, there's a certain approach. To get more powerful, there's a certain approach, and so far and so forth. But there are going to be more times where we have to break those rules, having a safety net. And our safety net is our knowledge of physiology and muscle mechanics and adaptation in general. And within that safety net, break those rules so that we can adjust our training intervention to whatever athlete we're working with.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I agree. Antonio, I want to link another question to this topic. So you're a researcher, so you read a lot of papers every day. I'm pretty sure you read tons of papers. How important is for a paper to be immediately applicable for a strength coach?
It's necessary. And that's why that sometimes like when students ask me questions about like reading papers or looking for like research grade type of information, what do we like? Like, thank you for saying that I'm a researcher. I do research. I don't consider myself a researcher because I don't believe in, if you, let me take a step back. If you want to be a researcher, you have to be willing to accept the fact that at the end of the day, you need to publish a next number of papers a year to be able to get your funds and your grants and all the everything that comes with it. I'm never going to play that game. I'm not willing to publish anything that I don't think it's valuable and applicable. So in that respect, I try to keep my research very much focused on answering real questions with real life applications. So I don't care whether or not my papers go on the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research or a bigger journal or whatever. I care about whether there is an abstract or a paper. I provide practitioner with something that they can apply immediately. And that I think it's mandatory for our type of profession, because we're not biologists, we're not biochemists, we are practitioners. We practice. We need to be able to practice. So whatever we learn, we need to convert that into practice. If we miss that link, everything becomes pointless. So in that respect, because of the system that supports research, and is a system that rewards quantity over quality, the vast majority of the research out there is completely useless. I'm not saying this is bad research. Like it's done, if you look at the statistics and the methods and methodologies, it's good research, but either it doesn't prove a point or it doesn't add any additional value to what we already know. It's just another paper that you're reading, another abstract that you're reading. It's another way of looking at the same thing. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is bias. So they look at correlation based on the statistical value of it, but they don't reason through the physiological aspects of what they're describing. Like you might find a correlation between a barbell back squat and I don't know, a 20-meter sprint. Yeah, there's a correlation. Of course, there's going to be a correlation, but like a barbell back squat, a 1 rep max barbell back squat is working on strength. Another quad is speed. You need to be able to reason through the process that links the two together, because if you see that correlation, that doesn't absolutely mean that if you improve your strength, you improve your 20-meter sprint. It's just a correlation. You need to be able to reason through it and develop that mindset of being critical about all this information you find online. Because then people say, okay, all I need to do is back squatting. I back squat, my speed is increasing. No, there's so much more that needs to go into it. And that's where a lot of the research out there falls short. Like they just look at statistics, they don't reason through what they're describing. So there's very little that can be applied or inferred by looking at papers or abstract. I probably read close to 25 to 30 papers a week on a regular basis. Full papers without even counting the abstracts that you have to go through to select 24 to 30 papers a week. So that's what, like about 100 papers a month. Let's call it, like, let's break it even. Out of 100 papers a month, I think on a good month, I print and save 1 or 2. So that tells you the degree of quality that is in the most recent literature. But then if you go back and look at papers that were published before the system change, so I'm referring to like 80s, 90s, early 2000s at most. If I were to pick 10 papers published in the 80s, probably 9 would be worth keeping, because the scientific rigor probably wasn't quite there. The statistics were easier, but the pedagogical value of those papers was much higher. They were teaching you something. They were after answers. They were looking at real protocols, real life applications, working with athletes, and that little that they showed was extremely valuable. Whereas nowadays, the majority of research is done on recreationally trained subjects, people that you can push to the level of an athlete. So it's like learning how to fine-tune an F1 car working on a Fiat 500. Like there's only that much that you can do if you're not working with elite level athletes, because the level of adaptation is going to be different. The level of commitment is going to be different. The level of stress required to create positive adaptation is going to be different. So I'm very critical toward like research, and I don't endorse the vast majority of it, because I think it's just a way universities are pushing out papers to get funds. And again, they're chasing after quantity and not quality. And I really much invite younger practitioners or even more experienced one to always be critical every time they read a paper. It doesn't matter what journal is published on, and it doesn't matter how many authors are on the list. If you read the paper and you can answer a simple question about like, okay, what am I going to do with what I've just learned from this paper? That paper was pointless. So always be critical. Doesn't matter how well it's written. Doesn't matter how many graphs and cool charts it has. It needs to teach you something. If it doesn't change the way you go about coaching a sport, it's a pointless paper for the most part.
And let's say you read one of those 1 or 2 papers that really make sense to you. And what comes before applying the intervention with one of your athletes? So what's your process after you read the paper?
So, well, that's a really good question. So there's one thing that is, I don't want to use any complex terminology, but there's one thing that is like ecological value, which means like, okay, that's a study. The majority of the studies that we look at are based on a type of training intervention, whether it is strength training, endurance training, rehabilitation, whatever the case may be. And that training intervention is composed by a number of training sessions with a certain like exercise selection, volume, intensity, all that good stuff that needs to go into whatever program design. So first of all, we want to make sure that whatever is described in the paper, in terms of like the actual training intervention, you can recreate. Don't take that for granted, because a lot of papers skim through the training intervention, but they don't describe it carefully and thoroughly. So they might say that they've done a combination of, let's say, eccentric training and concentric training using a leg extension machine, but they might not go to the extent of describing sets, reps, loads, rest periods. If you don't find that information, immediately throw it in the trash. Like it's not an applicable paper. Just by saying that doing 3 sets of 10 on a leg extension with a time under tension of 2-1-2, for instance, doesn't tell you anything. It's not applicable to anything because you don't have rest periods, you don't have a percentage of load, you don't have the context in which that training session was inserted. Like, was that just a single exercise? Was more than one exercise? Was once a week, twice a week? If you don't have all those informations, whatever you learn from a paper immediately becomes not applicable, immediately loses ecological value. And I'm extremely picky. Like, my entire dissertation is based on high force eccentric training. So very heavy eccentric training. I guarantee you, I've read in the last 4 years, probably well over 200 papers on eccentric training alone. Out of 200 papers, there were a total of 5 papers only that describe the training program. 5 out of 200. So 5 papers that actually describe what exercise, what load, sets and reps, rest period, weekly breakdown of the training process, like how often, how long was the training session, how long was the block, all those informations that you need to be able to reproduce the same type of intervention. Because you're chasing an outcome, you're chasing a specific degree of adaptation. But if you can't create the stimulus behind it, you're just guessing. You're guessing over someone else's work. You don't even know if you're going to get the same results out of it. So very first thing, before you try to apply anything, make sure that you know precisely what to do so that you can duplicate this, if you will, duplicate the study in your own little environment or situation, knowing exactly what to do at any given time. And for that, I mean, if you look, like, there's so many programs on like hypertrophy training, for instance, where they recommend you all these different combination of like sets and reps and time under tension. Great. How do you put that into paper? Like, how many exercises, how many sets, how many reps? Like, you need to have that precise breakdown on your intervention for you to be able to apply that paper in real life. If you don't have that degree of information, yes, read the paper. Maybe it's valuable. Maybe it gives you it sparks you to try something different or experiment with something different, but it doesn't become really applicable.
Yeah, these are some very great tips for all our listeners out there. Antonio, let's switch gears. And now I want to talk with you about your books. So you wrote several books, some reviews, some translations. I would like to know from you, what's the thought process behind the creation of a manual?
Wow. I think I wrote every single book so far because I wanted to learn more. So it never, ever started from ever. I swear, I never even considered writing a book. I considered being able to put on paper what I've learned in a way that I can make sense of it. Like, I don't want to do anything because someone told me to do so. I don't want someone to come and tell me, if you want your athletes to get stronger, do 5x5 at 80%. I don't take that as an answer. I need to know why and how to do things. And that pushed me to, first of all, second guess anyone, no matter how respected they are as practitioners. I second guess everyone by default. And I take their point, I respect it, I listen to them, I apply it, I do my research on the side, and I see what of that works and what of that didn't work. And by doing that process over and over and over again, you start from copying, if you will, someone else's approach, because at the beginning you're not very experienced. So you go by what you learn from others. And through that process of filtration, you end up being similar to someone else in the field, and you end up being your own individual practitioner with your own philosophy and your own approach to things that is no longer similar to anyone else. And along this process, you go through reading papers, reading other books, and trying to make sense out of things that no one else is explaining you. You are learning that in firsthand. Like you are in the trenches, learning, like you said, trials and error, what worked for you. And again, I think you get to a point where you've done that for so long that you don't consider yourself an expert, because I never consider myself an expert about anything. I'm constantly learning, but you've gone far enough that your approach has delivered decent results and you're willing now to share that with other people's. And I think that's how we, as practitioners, that's how we improve our field of practice and how we push our fellow practitioners to grow and get better over time. I don't want to bother you with like this analogy, but like I'm a huge fan of marine biology. I love studying like in particular, I read a lot of evolutions and behaviors on whales because I think it's very fascinating, and it teaches you a lot of things about nonverbal communication and culture, like how we learn from others. Like every single new generation starts in terms of knowledge where the previous generation ended. Like they learn, they practice, they grow old, they teach to the following generation, and that's the starting point for the future generations to develop and get better. We have lost a lot of that because of too much information made available. It used to be like that. Like you used to go to someone, learn, take home what you can, and then develop yourself. Now younger practitioners have so much background noise with like junk informations available on YouTube, social media, that is so difficult to find someone to follow. It's so difficult to find someone that has no personal agenda, no second goal, is not after money, is not after fame, that is willing to genuinely share what I've learned so that you can take it and make it better. Like, is immediately when I publish a book, I know that within a year, someone is going to do something better than I put in that book. And that's okay. That's part of the process. I want to put stone there for other people to build upon it. I want to give them what I've learned in the last 15 years so they can make it better. They can make it their own. I don't want them to go in 5 years from now and say, like, I'm doing what Antonio wrote in his book. I want them to say, I've learned this from Antonio. Part of it was good. Part of it was junk. I fixed it. This is my way of doing things. Because that way our generation, our future generations have a better starting point to become better practitioners. I didn't have that level of guidance when I started in this profession, and I wish for other people to have that moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, I can definitely understand what you say when you said that you started writing books because you wanted to learn more and you wanted to study yourself, because this is the same reason why I started a podcast, actually 2 podcasts, because I want to learn more, and I found out the best way for me to learn and understand things is through listening. So I said, okay, why I can't start a podcast? So absolutely. I understand what you said. So Antonio, so you coach athletes, you research, you write books, you do everything. What's your secret?
When I used to be I used to be extremely challenged in multitasking. So for many, many years, and that's up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was very I had very much tunnel vision. Like I was on one thing only, trying to do the best I could at one thing only. Like whether it was coaching, academics, whatever, but it was very much single focus. And to be honest, I know this sounds very cliche, but like later on in life, I realized that by being so single focused on one thing only, you learn that there's more that you are missing than what you're actually learning. And that goes to our profession, personal relationships, being able to have a good balance between personal life and work. So I force myself to get out of that tunnel vision and try to be better at multitasking. And multitasking, I don't necessarily mean like writing, coaching, just everything that is career based. I'm talking about like personal relationship, personal development, family, work, career, ambitions, goals, hobbies, everything. there has to be a place and a time for everything in life. You can't just be a slave to your job and not having anything else besides work. That doesn't work that way. And when I wanted to become multitasking, I took on writing, and that's where I wrote my very first book with ATS. And I did that before the pandemic even started. So I did that at the peak of my busiest time because I was still in school, I was coaching full time, I was doing research, I was teaching, and I was writing. So I had at least 5 schedules to handle every day, plus personal relationships. And the only thing that kept me sane was continue to train just as much as I used to when I was younger. I switched my focus from, I'm no longer performance driven. Like if you were to talk to me 10 years ago, I was training to win powerlifting meets. I was training to be the best athlete possible. That's no longer my goal because it requires a level of energy that I don't have in me anymore. Like we grow up, we have responsibilities. It's different. But I realized that if I keep my spark and my passion for sports alive, everything else naturally falls into play. So I try to train 2 or 3 times a day. That's not necessarily like an hour session. It might be an half-hour jog to just get my brain out of work, or a quick kettlebell session at home just to move around, or a bike ride, or whatever the case might be. But keeping my brain sharp through physical activity has been the only thing that allowed me to multitask in a way that I'm now capable of doing. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's extremely difficult, especially now that with NSCA Italy, with my job, with the guys from Obiettivo Performance, we're running so many projects at Tanta College. There's so much happening. 2023 is going to be a great year for many, many projects that I've been working on in the last 5 years. It never gets easier, but the only way I could get to the point of managing multitasking was to keep myself sharp through exercise. And that's something that I recommend. Like I speak every day with a lot of like fellow practitioners in Italy and other places. And it makes me sad when I realize that they get so invested into their job or their career, they don't even train anymore. So what's the point? Like we need to keep in touch with our roots, and we need to stay grounded. And that's the best way to do so is by still being, I know it sounds again cliche, but you have to practice what you preach. Like if you're passionate about training, how can you not be passionate enough to find half hour a day to exercise, or like following a decent diet, stay fairly in shape? I mean, I know it sounds like common sense, but it speaks volume of the level of dedication as a practitioner. I would never ask any of my athletes to do anything I myself wouldn't do. Like I think that kept me much more focused and actually gave me more energy to go about my projects, more than just being tunnel vision on just one goal only and just hammer it down until you get it.
Great. You just gave me an amazing answer, Antonio.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Antonio, it's been a great episode, but before saying goodbye, usually we finish off with 3 rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
So the first one, who's your mentor?
I would say a personal mentor would be Dr. Massimo Spattini. He has never been, and I mean it with absolutely no disrespect, and I hope he's listening to this episode, so I'm sure he will appreciate it. He has never been a mentor in the sense that he mentored me through my career, like telling me what to do or giving me advices. He simply showed me how to be a good practitioner himself. So he led by example, and by doing so, he was the greatest influence in my career. So he was definitely a mentor, and one that I never had the privilege of meeting, but he shaped my career quite a bit, was Professor Yuri Verkhojanski. I shared that anecdote with everyone. Like when I joined university, when I was 19 years old in Italy, and my mom wanted to encourage me to read more in preparation for university, she took me to a bookstore near the university, so like a textbook store, and he said, like, buy whatever book you want that is in line with your interest. I'll pay for it, read it, and that's you get like a kick for your career. And I remember being in this massive bookstore with all these brand new books, and I ended up buying the very last copy of a manual that Verkhojanski wrote in 1987, so the year that I was born. And that was the very first exercise science or sports science book I've ever read in my life. And by Natalia's Verkhojanski's admission, that was the most complex book Verkhojanski has ever written. So I probably understood 0.05% of it the first time I read it, but it was so shocking to see his approach to sports science that I could never look back. Like, it's almost like if you drive a Ferrari, everything else is going to feel slow. Like, reading that book and that level of rigor in like designing the protocols, reading science and applying science definitely shaped my career.
Okay, great. So I guess you already answered, but the second question was, what's your favorite book on strength and conditioning?
Oh, okay. Well, let me go with an international title so everyone can follow that. It would probably be Super Training.
Okay, great. Third question. Who's one athlete that you would like to work with?
Ooh. Any athlete? I can pick any athlete?
Any athlete.
Any athlete? I will give you the most selfish answer ever, but I would love to work with an F1 driver so I can stick around F1 a little bit more. That's the only reason. I can get a free ticket to go all races.
Nice. Great answer. Okay, Antonio, if some of our listeners would like to reach out to you, where can they find you?
For sure on Instagram. It's the easiest way for me. I have no Instagram is Antonio_Squillante CSCS. It's the easier way for me to be in touch with people in different time zones. But if there's anyone that really wants to go into a conversation, I have no problem sharing my phone number and my email on Instagram. So just reach out, send me a DM, I'll get back. You probably know that better than I do, but like, I'm not very skilled with social media. I'm pretty incompetent. So every time someone tag me or post me, my DM gets overwhelmed with like messages of people mentioning you. So I easily lose track of messages. So sometimes I don't answer, but it's not because I don't care about answering. It just gets lost in a bunch of other messages. And I can't even make the difference between DM and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm pretty incompetent. If I don't answer once, message me twice, I'm going to get to it and I have no problem jumping on a phone call, Zoom call, email thread, whatever the case might be.
Okay, Antonio. Thanks again for taking the time today and spending some time with us. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and it was very enjoyable, and good luck with all your projects because I know that you're very busy too.
Thank you. Whoa, another great episode with another amazing guest. Guys, if you like the episode, please share it on your social media, and don't forget that you can find Sport Vitamins on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, guys, I'm out.